Hello, my name is Morten Svinndal, and I'm a guide at the Oscarsborg Museum. We are now at the on the mainland. So this is also part of Oscarsborg, but Oscarsborg is more known for the installations out on the island of Kaholmen. But here we are on the mainland, on the Drøbak side. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about some special guns we have, and these are the British Armstrong guns that we altogether had 9 pieces of, and from 5 different models. I'm very fascinated by these guns because there was kind of a technologically gap, and it was in a period of transition that they came in the 1860s. And this was during a time where there was a kind of a competition between warships and coastal guns about getting the upper hand. And it seemed like at that time the ships tended to have the upper hand because they got the screws, the propellers, so they had much better maneuverability than they had previously. They had more speed, and they got armor. And to conquer that, in order to do something about that, it needed to have armor-piercing artillery. And that required to have heavy artillery, and you also required high velocity and a solid shell to get through the armor. So this was actually the first kind of war machine type of coastal gun that we had here. Previous to this, the guns looked more or less like Pirates of the Caribbean guns, pirate guns. So this is more a war machine where you had the fundament here, the cradle, and you have another cradle on top here, which the barrel rests in. That top cradle would go with the barrel when it gets the recoil, so it will move. And you can also see that it's attached to the ground by a center pivot here, which means that you can layer the gun about 360 degrees around. If you have a front pivot, that would not be feasible. And what was also special with this gun was the recoil mechanism. The recoil mechanism was in 3 parts. It was the friction between the upper cradle and the lower cradle, and then you also had the reason that the lower cradle is actually increasing height, so you have to go against the height here, and that will also take away some of the energy from the recoil. But those both were fixed standards. What you could instill or change was actually the rail system here, where you have these rails that could be tightened or loosened, and that had to be done from each round, and that took some experience because you had to do it exactly right, and there was no index or anything. You just had to know how much to tighten it, and if you did it wrong, then the recoil would be too heavy and the barrel would just go back and stand exactly pointing into the heaven, and then it would fall down and everything would shiver. So that was something you would try to avoid. What also was very special with this gun was it was acquisition in 1866, and then it was meant as an armor-piercing gun for Oscarsborg, but it was placed in Oslo on the harbor side and used as a gun for trials for 20 years. And then after those 20 years, it was sent to Oscarsborg and stored at Oscarsborg for 8 years. So it was actually installed here in a gun position when it was almost 30 years old. And this battery was then constituted by this gun, the so-called Norwegian gun, like it was called by people, and 3 other guns that are slightly smaller. This is a 26.7 centimeter, the others are 22.6 centimeter. Model 1871, while this is a model 1866. So these guns constituted what we call the road bend battery, and it was installed in 1895, which was a bit late for these kind of guns, which were modern in the 1860s, 1870s, and that was something that probably has to do with parliamentarism coming to Norway, and advice of the expert was not accepted by the parliament, so they wanted their own solution, and that solution was worked out by a member of parliament called Gregersen, and then it was also called Gregersen's battery after that. So militarily, this battery didn't have much purpose. It was probably too old when it was installed. But technically, it's quite interesting because it's bridging the old Pirates of the Caribbean type of guns with the more modern breech loaders, backloaders that came later. And actually, when this was installed in 1895, then Oscarsborg had already got its 3 new Krupp 28 centimeter breech loaders 3 years earlier. So we're now at gun number 1 in the so-called road bend battery or Gregersen's battery. This is the westernmost gun, and it's a 22.6 centimeters, slightly smaller than the one we saw first here. And the 3 guns from here to number 3 were taken from the southern battery of Oscarsborg, but they had to be removed because when the new main battery came, you could not have a battery in front of that. So they were put out here. The loading was used this crane, so they had to place the charge here, and then it had to be taken up by the crane and a trolley on tracks over there, and then they had to load the charge, and then they had to do the same thing with the shell. And the shell would on this gun be approximately 110 kilos. On a bigger gun it would be 130 something kilos. And then they had to hoist it up and then load it from the front of the barrel. And that, of course, was a cumbersome thing. It took a while to do that. One of the problems, of course, with the front loader was that the shell would be slightly undercalibered, and that had to be done in order to get it all the way down the barrel. And then, of course, you lost some of the energy from the charge when you fired, because it would go just on the sides of the shell. And they fixed that in a way by adding a plate to the rear of the shell, and that plate would then catch a lot of the energy from the charge, and it would propel the shell a little bit, so the velocity would be higher than it would be if they didn't use it. One of the problems with that plate that they had was that when they fired, it fell off, and it actually fell on the roofs or the buildings in front of the gun. So there were a lot of complaints from the civilians because they got these plates on their roofs. And that was a minor problem, I guess. Another problem that they had here, one thing that actually happened on the gun here, was that the recoil was more than 2 meters. So there was one incident in 1814 where a sergeant actually stood here, not on this exact gun, but on one of the guns that were placed on Kalmen on the island. And he was actually crushed. He should have stood, of course, behind this plate. And he should have known. He was had been a sergeant for 10 years. So no one understands how he could do a mistake like that. But of course he was injured and he died at the hospital after that incident. So here we can see southern Kaholmen, where we have the main fort of Oscarsborg. And I mentioned that we had altogether 9 Armstrong guns on the fortress. And 3 of them, actually the 3 ones we have up here now, were placed on the very southern tip where you can see the tree. They were there since 1872 until they were moved up here in 1895. So that was 22.6 centimeters. And then we had also 2 Armstrongs in the main battery. You can see the 3 easternmost guns in the main battery, but there are 2 empty positions far to the west in the main battery, and those were filled with 2 26.7 centimeter Armstrongs, model 1875, 1876. Those 2 were unfortunately sold in 1853 and taken down. But we still have the 3 Armstrongs in the eastern battery. You can see that on the right hand side of the main fortress, and you can see them popping up behind the wall there. And those are 2 71 models and one 75-76 model. The special thing with the 75-76 model on the left side there was that it has hydraulic brakes, so it doesn't have the old rail brakes that we had on the other guns. So that's a different thing. We will continue making films like this and put them on YouTube, and we would like to encourage you to subscribe on our channel on YouTube. It doesn't cost anything, and that will automatically give you the updates as they are coming.